Good morning. Oh, gosh. All right. Well, after 10 years here, I get to speak to you, and I'm very excited. So today, I'm going to be talking about Ephesians 4. Going to be talking about the best year yet. So obviously, we have a lot of things going on right now in our church, a lot of changes, a lot of whatever. And so I am hoping, the elders are hoping, the staff are hoping that 2023 is one of the best years for us. So I've got a couple points that I'm going to make, and I'm going to read a children's book that you probably heard before or seen, and we're just going to kind of chat today, and hopefully it'll be good. So we'll find out. So my first point today is we must do it together. So when you think about the church, when you think about all that kind of stuff, you have to talk about unity. You have to talk about being together, doing things together, working together, because without everyone here, without the people in the seats, without the people watching online, we can't do it, right? So I want to read Ephesians 4:11 through 16, and it says, "And he himself gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers, equipping the saints for the work of ministry to build up the body of Christ, until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of God's Son, growing into maturity with the stature measured by Christ's fullness. Then we will no longer be little children tossed by the waves and blown around by every wind of teaching, by human cunning, with cleverness in the techniques of deceit. But speaking the truth in love, let us grow in every way into him who is the head, Christ. From him, the whole body, fitted and knit together by every supporting ligament, promotes the growth of the body for building up itself in love by the proper working of each individual part." So that whole thing, we're talking about togetherness. We're talking about how the church body works together. And he even talks about how the whole body is fitted and knit together by every supporting ligament. If you know anything about the human body, ligaments are very important. Without them, we can't move. Without them, we can't do a lot of things. And so it's talking about how, as a church, we're kind of this living being almost, and that each piece, including every one of you, is very important to how the body operates and continues to grow. So there's three things that I want to kind of talk about here. The first, the overarching thing is you have to know the meaning of your call. So he speaks about, he says, apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, right? There's so many different people that he equips for the work of the church. And so that is kind of this, we each have a piece. So just because you're a part of the church doesn't mean you're supposed to be a pastor, doesn't mean you're supposed to teach, doesn't mean you're supposed to be an apostle or whatever. We all have different roles in our church. And that's not our church, but church, the church. So the first thing that we have to look at is the Bible, right? We have to look at the Bible and figure out what is our role. What can we do for our role in the church? Hi, buddy. So then you have to talk about your vocation, right? So this is not your job. This is not the thing, your career. This is your spiritual, your spiritual job, I guess, if you want to say that. So we have our job, right? So you work at a sewer plant, or you're a welder, or you're a farmer, whatever that is. That's not necessarily your spiritual job. So you have to find out what is your role. So what is your role in the church, whether that's spending time in the children's ministry with little kids, or with youth, or with senior adults, or whatever that is. What is your role in the church? And then we all have a calling to share Christ. So as a believer, we are not only told, but made to share the gospel. And so no matter who you are, no matter what your role is in the church, your job is to still share the gospel, right? You don't have to be on the stage to share the gospel. You, in your daily lives, whatever you're doing, you have opportunities to speak to people and share what Christ has done in your life. Now, that may take time. That may take a relationship. That may take years for you to build up that kind of, I don't know what word I'm trying to say, but relationship with people so that you can have the opportunity to share that with them. But that is our job. We all have a calling to share Christ. So we have this grace which allows us to play our part. The unity we have, though, we need to guard it. Because if we're not unified in the church, then we are not able to preach the gospel as well as we could if we were unified. So there's a quote from A.W. Tozer. I think it's from The Pursuit of God. I didn't write that down, but I believe that's correct. He said, "Has it ever occurred to you that 100 pianos all tuned to the same fork are automatically tuned to each other? They are of one accord by being tuned not to each other, but to another standard to which each one must individually bow. So 100 worshipers met together, each one looking away to Christ, are in heart nearer to each other than they could possibly be, were they to become unity conscious and turn their eyes away from God to strive for closer fellowship." So I don't know if you know what a tuning fork is. I'm obviously musical, but so a tuning fork is a metal piece that is tuned to a specific note, and you hit it against something and you hear the note, whatever that is. So when you take that piece, it doesn't change. It's the same note no matter what you do. And if you tune pianos to it, it's not, all those pianos are going to be the exact same tuning, right? So we as a body, if we're all tuned to Christ, then we are all unified together in the same note, basically. So one of the things that's super interesting about the New Testament is there is 100 times where one another is used. So one another in Greek is alelon, so it's one word, but it's not two, but it's used 100 times in the New Testament. 47 of those verses are specifically instructions to the church. 13 of them are about unity, 5 are about love, 7 are about humility. So there's something to say about the fact that the New Testament itself, when you look at those books, there's 100 times where it talks about one another, loving one another, being together with one another, right? So the Bible is not foreign to saying, hey, you should be together. You should be unified. You should continue to love one another and be with one another and meet with one another. So the best way, I think, to apply this principle to our lives is to build each other up. We have to build those around us up with our words, with our kindness, because we physically cannot do life alone. We were not engineered, we were not made to do life alone. We were made to be with each other, to be together. And this kind of fits with, my role here a little bit with life groups and stuff. It is so important for us to be together. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a life group, but it could be like discipleship or anything like that. Just being together with one another kind of thing. So you need to find your spot. So where's your place in serving the church? And you have to be present and active. Okay, so next point, it starts with you. The next verses, 17 through 24, says, "Therefore I say this and testify in the Lord, you should no longer live as the Gentiles live in the futility of their thoughts. They are darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God, because of the ignorance that is in them and because of the hardness of their hearts. They became callous and gave themselves over to promiscuity for the practice of every kind of impurity with the desire for more and more. But that is not how you came to know Christ. Assuming you heard about him and were taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, to take off your former way of life, the old self that is corrupted by deceitful desires, to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, the one created according to God's likeness in righteousness and purity and truth. So this part is you, right? It starts with you. So if we don't take time to align ourselves with the things of God, we won't be able to be united with the church. So it takes each one of us on our own journey together being unified with God so that we can be unified together. So it begins with ourselves. It begins with our heart. If our heart is right, then it's time to get our mind right. But it takes our heart getting right first. So, this book, Very Hungry Caterpillar, I'm sure you have read it before. If you were born anywhere after 1969, you probably read it as a kid. So, if you look at this book, it's honestly pretty spiritual. So I'm going to read it to you. In the light of the moon, a little egg lay on a leaf. One Sunday morning, the warm sun came up, and pop, out of the egg came a tiny and very hungry caterpillar. He started to look for some food. On Monday, he ate through one apple, right? So he goes through all these things, eating, and then he eats a bunch of junk, right? Eats through cake, ice cream cone, one pickle, a slice of Swiss cheese, salami, maybe feels like leftovers from like Christmas or Thanksgiving. But so then he had a stomach ache, right? So when we look at this book, we see this journey of a caterpillar that decides to try to fill himself with all kinds of different things. And then he eats a leaf, and then he's fine, right? So can anyone guess what the spiritual aspect of that is? We try to fill our lives with so much junk that all we needed was the leaf in the end, and we were fine, right? And so then, the hungry caterpillar turns into a chrysalis and then becomes a beautiful butterfly, right? So salvation, but so we try so hard to fill our lives with all of this junk that we have going on that we don't really look towards that green leaf, that Christ in our lives. And so we have to try to fill our lives with better things so that we can then have our mind and our heart right. So the biggest aspect here is that we have to continually renew our minds. So what does that look like? Well, the first step is you have to guard your mind, right? So you have to take time to guard your mind from all of the things around you because there's constant junk everywhere around us. You live in the world. We always have junk. So whether that's the person talking bad about you or the things going on in the world or just whatever's going on in your house, whatever that is, you have to guard your mind from all of the things so that we can continue to be unified. The second step is that we have to recognize our self-talk. So we have to learn to recognize the voices in our head that are telling us that we're not good enough, that we're horrible, that, I should have said something different, or whatever. We have to recognize that self-talk. I know for me, with my anxiety and things like that, I have a lot of self-talk, and it's always running, and I always have to tell it to shut up. Because if you let it consume your head and your mind and your heart, then all of a sudden you are in a very bad place, right? So what do we do next? Okay, we recognize the self-talk, right? So now we need to replace it with God talk. So what is the truth? What is the truth that Scripture teaches us? What is the truth that we can find by our spiritual leaders around us, people that are more spiritually mature? What is the truth? So we replace that self-talk, all of that junk, with the nice green leaf. So then, after that, we get to rest in knowing we're loved, right? I think there's probably a fifth step, and that's probably rinse and repeat, right? Because just because we rest in knowing that we're loved by Christ today doesn't mean tomorrow, when all the junk keeps happening again, that we're going to be okay, right? It is a constant process of us remembering who God is, remembering why he died, why his son died for us, and we have to constantly continue to remind ourselves, because if we don't, then we will be overwhelmed again. So, the third point is we grow when you grow. So what does that mean? Let me read the last verses of Ephesians real quick. Therefore, putting away lying, speak the truth, each one to his neighbor, because we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. Don't let the sun go down in your anger, and don't let the devil an opportunity. Let the thief no longer steal. Instead, he is to do honest work with his own hands, so that he has something to share with anyone in need. No foul language should come from your mouth, but only what is good for building up someone in need, so that it gives grace to those who hear. And don't grieve God's Holy Spirit. You were sealed by him for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness, anger, and wrath, shouting, and slander be removed from you, along with all malice, and be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving one another, just as God also forgave you in Christ. There was like 3 one another's there. So, the growth of the church only happens when we all grow together. So just like in a team relay, when you were in school or if you did track or whatever, you have to work together to get to the next checkpoint, right? So if one person is slower, then it will take longer for your team to get that next baton, right? So we have to work together, and we must urge one another on together. So I like to think about it as like ducks, right? If you know anything about ducks, they fly in a V, and the people at the front are the oldest and slowest, right? And that's because they keep the pace. So when we as a church, we allow the pace keepers to be the slowest people, then that allows us all to urge one another together and to continue to move our church forward. Now, that doesn't mean you get to kind of step back and say, oh, I don't have to be as godly because they're not. What that means is that we have the opportunity to, as we continue in our spiritual walk, to help others grow around us and continue to move forward. So, if you think about it like so we talked about all these pieces, right? So if you think about it like a car, you have all of these pieces of a car that make them work, right? If you don't have an engine in the car, it's probably not going to move. If you don't have a transmission, it's probably also not going to move, or if it does, it's going to move very slow at a very high RPM. If you don't have a alternator, then as you're driving, your battery's probably going to die, and then it's also not going to move, right? If you don't have a battery, it probably won't start. So there's all of these pieces that they all have to work harmoniously together. So, sometimes we have to look at our church check engine light and figure out, hey, how can we help this piece? How can we help you move along? How can we help you grow spiritually? Because it's not our responsibility to leave people behind. It's our responsibility to grow with them together in love, so that we can continue to push the church forward. So in the last verses, it says, in 31, it says, let all bitterness, anger, and wrath, shouting, slander be removed from you, along with all malice, and be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving one another, just as God also forgave you in Christ. So if we look at these things, so my next point is that it's not a point, but it's a thing that's on your outline. You must replace bitterness, anger, So you must replace bitterness, anger, wrath, shouting, slander, and malice with kindness, compassion, and forgiveness. So I want to look at those really quick. So bitterness. Bitterness can be having imaginary conversations. You can replay conversations over and over. You're easily offended by a person, no matter what they do, or you have strong negative reactions to things that they do or say. That is bitterness, right? So I'm sure we've all done that. I have, definitely. Anger, right? I've struggled with this pretty much my whole life. Raising your voices, clenching your fists, frowning, scowling, clenching your jaw, trembling, right? Wrath, allowing full vent to your rage, so not even holding back, right? Worse than anger, crazier than anger. Shouting talks about noise, commotion, uproar, being obnoxious, being riotous. Slander, speaking false things about others. And then malice, evil intent, deliberate harm, or intent to injure. That one is probably less common, but I know I've thought about it before. But so there's all of these things right here that he's saying that we shouldn't have, right? But we definitely have all those pretty often, I would say. I wouldn't say that there's a day goes by that something doesn't probably make me angry or bitter or whatever, because humans are stupid sometimes, right? We all do dumb stuff. We all get things done to us that we might not feel were correct or whatever. We all have reasons. If you've ever been behind the wheel of a car, you know what road rage is, I'm sure. Just because, man, people just don't know how to drive, right? But we have all of these things that we are called to replace. So we're supposed to replace them with kindness, right? So what does it mean to be kind to somebody? Doing little things, smiling at them, saying hi, asking how they're doing. That's pretty easy, right? I don't do it very often, probably as often as I should, but it's pretty easy to show compassion. So when somebody's going through something, we recently had someone in our church lose their husband. Being compassionate to them, understanding how they feel, asking them how they're doing. That's pretty easy, right? It's a human thing that we should all do, but we don't necessarily think about it all the time, or we just don't have time for it because of what we filled our lives with. And forgiveness. This one's probably the hardest, right? Somebody wrongs us. It's way easier to be angry. It's way easier to be bitter. But forgiveness allows us to be unified with God, right? So if we take the time to forgive the person that's wronged us, we're able to hopefully continue to grow in our faith. Because a lot of times when we let those things, like the top ones, fill our lives, we have things like, so we read this book a while ago, and I think it's Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, I think. But it talks about a few things. It talks about wounds, lies, vows, strongholds. So when I was involved in Living Free and the recovery ministry and all that stuff, those were very common things that I was dealing with. So you have a wound, right? So Brian Orban hurt me. He said something bad to me. So, I'm wounded now. And then I make a vow that he's never going to do that again. I'm not going to let him, right? So then there's a lie that Satan tells us that says, man, I don't think anyone else cares about you either, because what he said is true. And then it becomes a stronghold for us. So when I think of a stronghold, I think of a big castle, right? 80-foot walls, whatever that is, and you're looking up at it and you're like, oh, there's no way I'm going to do this. I can't scale that. I don't have a trebuchet to blow it down. But so you have this big stronghold now that's kind of in between you and God, because you've allowed yourself you've allowed the wound. We get wounds all the time, but you allowed it to become a vow that then Satan told you a lie about, that then became a stronghold. And strongholds are a lot harder to get rid of than a wound, right? A wound is a Band-Aid or maybe some stitches, but a stronghold is a big brick wall that you can run at as much as you want, but you're probably going to hurt yourself in the end, right? And so the only way to really break strongholds is with Christ, with God. So kind of what I wanted to do today was just give us a realization of that we can have the best year of this church. We can move forward. I know whatever has happened in the past or whatever, it's over now. Today is 2023. It's the beginning of a new year. I know that 2020 was bad. 2021 was still not great. 2022 was getting better, I guess, but things have happened, right? Now, I'm not saying that 2023 is going to be amazing, that we're going to have this amazing year, we're going to grow to 5,000 people. No. But if we choose, to be fair, could happen, right? But if we choose as a church to work together, to have unity with each other, then we can begin to build the thing that God has called us to from the beginning. But I don't want to focus on just the church either. I want to focus on you. So what is the thing that this year, everybody has goals, everybody has New Year's resolutions, whatever you call it, and within the first month, they'll probably be gone because we don't work at it, we don't take the time, right? So I want to encourage you that this year we continue to build in our relationship with Christ and we actually do it. Because I know it gets hard. I know there's days. I know there's days where you're tired. I know there's days where you don't want to do anything, or you want to sit in your bed and cry, or you just want to sleep. But we have to give ourselves the time each day to just be with Christ. It doesn't have to be anything long. It can be 5 minutes. It can be 2 minutes. It can be while you're in the shower. Some of you might be in there for more than 15. But whatever that is, you have to spend the time with God. And that doesn't mean you have to sit in your closet, kneeling down, hands and eyes closed. That means that you just have a conversation. Because he wants to know what's going on in your life. He wants to know the things going on. I know there's people struggling with all kinds of things in this room. He wants you to bring those to him because that is what matters. And the only way that we can be in union together and to grow as a church is if you take the time to sit, stand, drive your car, whatever that is, and just speak to him. Because it's our responsibility as believers to continue to grow. He never wants us to be at a place where we're like, I'm good, I'm great, I'm the best Christian out there. Because we're not. If you think that, you're not. I know there's been times in my life where I have felt that way, where I'm like, man, I've got so much knowledge, but you're going through stuff. Your heart is dark, whatever that is. And so I want to encourage you today to just take time out of your day, how large or small, and just spend a little time with him. And I guarantee as you continue to form that habit, that it'll become easier and it'll become better. And I'm talking to myself too, because I'm not good at it either. I get busy. I've got kids. I've got things I'd rather do, right? Or I come home from work and I'm just tired. But we have to take time to grow. We have to take time to spend time in the gospel, to hear his voice. And so I hope that as we step into this year, starting today, that we can do that. I'd love to pray for you, and then we'll go into worship. Father, I thank you so much for the new year that, it feels like a fresh start. It feels like a time where we can just come together and say, okay, I'm in now. I pray that as we leave this place that we can remember to spend time with you, that as we go through this week, as we go through the month, as we go through the rest of the year, we can remember to spend time with you, because the only way our church grows is with you at the helm, is with you in each of our hearts growing us individually. So I pray that as we go through this year, that you bless our church. As we search for a pastor, that you bless the pastor search committee. You bless our elders, you bless our staff, so that we can continue to make the moves that you want, so we can continue to do the things that you've called us to do. I pray all these things in Jesus' name.